The dishwasher hummed behind me as I held a family portrait that looked perfect, except the woman smiling wasn't me. As I kept my hands steady, I folded the photo once and chose silence over the panic clawing up my throat. While that hum filled the kitchen, I noticed how easily my husband's arm fit around her, like it had practiced. The same sound followed my thoughts as I zoomed in on his hand and saw a ring that wasn't ours. That's when I realized this wasn't a prank or a threat. It was a preview. Still listening to the dishwasher finish its cycle, I decided I wouldn't ask questions. I'd collect proof. Before we start, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. If you enjoy the story, please hit like, subscribe, and join our community. It really helps us grow. The morning had been so normal it almost felt rehearsed. The dishwasher hummed behind me, steady and patient, like it was trying to convince the whole house everything was fine. Sunlight poured through the blinds and painted pale stripes across the kitchen counter. The air smelled like lemon dish soap and warm toast, and somewhere down the hall the TV murmured with a cartoon Ben liked. Bright voices bouncing off quiet walls. I stood barefoot on cold tile, sorting the mail into neat piles the way I always did. Grocery coupons, a dentist reminder, a flyer with a smiling family promising the lawn you deserve. Bills I pretended didn't make my chest tighten. Then my fingers landed on an envelope that didn't match anything else. It was thick, heavy cardstock, the kind that felt almost silky when you rubbed your thumb over it. My name was written in careful handwriting that didn't belong to anyone I knew. Not Ryan's sharp angles, not my sister Jordan's loopy cursive, not a kid's messy print. This was deliberate, calm, like someone had taken their time with me. Emily. I flipped it over. No return address, no business name, no little line of accountability, just blank white space like whoever sent it had decided I didn't deserve the courtesy of knowing where it came from. A weird chill slid up my arms. I told myself it was probably harmless, some photo order from school, maybe, or a Christmas card from someone we barely remembered. But my body didn't listen to my logic. My shoulders tightened. My mouth went dry. The dishwasher's hum suddenly sounded too loud, like it was trying to drown out my thoughts. I slid a nail under the flap and tore it open. The paper ripped with a soft, clean sound that felt wrong for something that might change my life. Inside was a single photograph, glossy, fresh, the kind you could smell, ink and paper and that faint chemical sweetness of a new print. It was a family portrait. Us, Ryan on the left in a navy button-down, smile perfect, eyes bright like he was selling something. Ben in the middle, small hands folded, hair combed the way I always fought to keep it. And me on the right. Posture familiar, shoulders angled slightly toward my son the way I always did without thinking. Except my face wasn't my face. There was a woman's smile where mine should have been. Not blurred, not a mistake, not some printing glitch. It was a clean, confident face, smooth skin, glossy lips, a smile that looked like it belonged on a school brochure. The lighting matched. The tone matched. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. For a second, my brain refused to accept what my eyes saw. Like if I blinked hard enough, my real face would snap back into place. My stomach dropped anyway. And then, God, the humiliation of it. The very first thought that flashed through me wasn't rage or fear. It was, do I usually look that tired? My gaze darted to the microwave door, catching my reflection in the dark glass, my messy bun, the faint crease between my brows, the sweatshirt with a tiny stain near the cuff. I hated myself in that moment for checking, for comparing, for reacting like this was somehow about me not being presentable enough to earn my own life, like sabotage needed my permission. My fingers tightened on the photo until the glossy edge bit into my skin. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven, and the kitchen suddenly felt too bright, too exposed. The sun on the counter looked harsh now, like an interrogation light. I lifted the picture closer, searching for an explanation. A prank watermark, a misprint, anything that made it make sense, but it only got worse the longer I stared. The woman's face fit my body too perfectly. The smile sat on my cheeks like it had always belonged there. The whole image screamed, "This is what your family is supposed to look like." I heard footsteps, Ryan's, heavy and unhurried, coming down the hallway. The floorboards creaked in the same spots they always did, and normally that sound meant comfort, routine. Morning. This time it made my pulse spike. He appeared in the kitchen doorway mid-shock, tie half loosened, coffee mug in hand like he'd been born holding it. He looked at me, then looked at what I was holding. "What's that?" he asked. His tone was too casual, too ready, like he'd already decided what my answer should be. A hot wave of instinct rose in me, something old and quiet that had learned to survive by observing first, by not giving away the full truth until I understood what I was standing in. My throat felt tight, but I forced my mouth into a laugh that didn't match my body at all. I folded the photo fast, the glossy paper bending with a crisp crease, and I slid it under the stack of mail like it was nothing. "Just junk mail," I said, light and careless, like I hadn't just watched my own face get erased. Ryan's eyes flicked to my hands, not my face, my hands, like he was measuring how steady they were. His smile lifted, quick and practiced, and he took a sip of coffee like he'd just asked about the weather. "People will mail anything these days," he said. I nodded too fast. My heart hammered so loud I felt like he had to hear it. He stepped closer, kissed the top of my head, warm breath, familiar cologne, and it made my skin crawl in a way that scared me. Because it wasn't that he felt like a stranger. It was that my house did. He turned to leave, already shifting into work mode, and I watched him disappear down the hall with the ease of a man who believed everything in this home belonged to him. Space, silence, and even the stories I was allowed to tell myself. When the back door clicked shut behind him, the kitchen went quiet except for the dishwasher's hum and my own shaky exhale. I pulled the photo back out and stared again, slower this time, like I was forcing my brain to stay present. My thumb traced the edge. My eyes drifted to the bottom corner, hunting for anything I'd missed. That's when I saw it. A faint little logo, printed so small it almost blended into the glossy shadow. Ever-Bright Imaging. My breath caught, because I hadn't heard that name in years, except Ryan had mentioned it weeks ago offhand, like it meant nothing. "A printing favor," he'd said, and suddenly, the envelope in my hands didn't feel random at all. Toast popped up with a dry click, and the smell hit me like a wave of grease and warmth that my stomach refused to accept. I stood at the counter with my fingers wrapped around my coffee mug so tightly the ceramic burned my palms. The kitchen light was too bright for this early, reflecting off the granite and the chrome faucet like it wanted to expose me. My hand trembled anyway, small shakes that traveled up my wrist, betraying me. Ben climbed onto his chair, knees knocking the table, humming to himself. Ryan moved behind him, smooth and cheerful, the kind of morning energy that made me feel defective. He glanced at me and smiled, but it stayed on his mouth, not his eyes. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said, like it was a joke and not an accusation. I tried to breathe evenly. "Just thinking," I managed. Ryan chuckled, flipping a pancake with a flourish. "There she goes," he said to Ben, as if I weren't right there. "Your mom's an overthinker." Then he leaned down, kissed Ben's head, and added in the same sing-song tone, "Mom's been stressed lately." Ben's eyes flicked to me, quick and worried, before he looked back at his plate. The humiliation landed quietly, the way insults do when they're delivered with a smile. My fear became a character trait, a cute quirk. Ryan slid pancakes onto Ben's plate, then watched me reach for the knife. I cut the stack into small squares, the way Ben liked. 4 neat rows, bite-sized. Ryan's hand came over mine, gentle but controlling, and shifted the knife angle. "No, like this," he murmured, guiding me as if I'd never fed our child before. You make everything complicated, he said softly, still smiling, still calm. Ben stared at his syrup like it suddenly required intense focus. I swallowed against the nausea and forced my voice to stay light. Hey, I said, casual, almost bored. Everbright Imaging, do you know what that is? Ryan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Just a pause, a fraction of a second, but my whole body noticed it. His eyes didn't meet mine. He chewed anyway, slow, then shrugged as if I'd asked about printer ink. Some vendor from work, he said, probably on a brochure or something. I answered, pretending that satisfied me. The coffee tasted bitter and wrong, and the mug felt slick with sweat from my palms. Ryan's phone buzzed on the table, one sharp vibration that seemed louder than the dishwasher had been. Without looking at the screen, he flipped it face down with a smooth, practiced motion, like a reflex built from repetition. His smile returned, perfect again, and he reached for his keys. Big day, he said, standing. Try not to spiral, Em. I nodded because it was easier than arguing, even though my throat tasted like pennies. He brushed past me, shoulder grazing mine, and I caught a whiff of his cologne mixed with gum. The dismissal sat in my chest, heavy, while he whistled like a man with nothing to hide. I watched the dark glass of his phone, face hidden, and listened to Ben's fork scrape his plate in nervous little circles. Today I know a real smile warms the room. That one didn't. The pickup line moved in tiny, impatient inches, like the whole school had agreed to crawl forward just to test my nerves. Sunlight flashed off windshields, sharp enough to make me squint, and the air inside my car smelled like warm plastic and the vanilla air freshener Ben had begged for weeks ago. Outside, parents stood in clusters with coffee cups and tote bags, waving at each other like everything in the world was safe and ordinary. My phone sat in the cup holder, screen dark, innocent. I kept glancing at it anyway, like it might suddenly confess something. I told myself to focus on the routine. Blinkers. Stop. Roll forward. Smile if someone looked in. The same little suburban choreography I'd done 100 times without thinking. Then my phone lit up. One buzz, short, surgical. A number I didn't recognize. The message was 3 words. Did you get it? My stomach tightened so hard it felt like I'd swallowed a fist. The car around me suddenly felt too small, like the seatbelt was a hand across my chest. Before I could even breathe, another message came through. A photo. My thumb hovered over it for a second, like touching it would make it real again. Then I tapped. The image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, and I felt cold spread through my fingers. It was the altered portrait. My body, my family, that woman's smile where my face should have been, lying on someone else's table. Not my kitchen counter, not my house, some other place. The tabletop was darker wood than mine, scratched along one edge. A half-empty glass sat near the photo, condensation ring blooming underneath it. In the corner, I could see a pale hand resting beside the print, fingertips close enough to touch the glossy edge like they'd been studying it. The timestamp at the top of the photo was from that morning. My throat went dry so fast my tongue felt stuck to the roof of my mouth. This wasn't just something sent to me. Someone had it. Someone had held it. Someone had taken a picture of it like it was evidence or entertainment. I glanced up through my windshield and forced my face into something neutral. A mom in a white SUV beside me waved brightly, like she expected me to wave back. I lifted my hand automatically, a stiff little flutter, while my insides twisted. I felt exposed. Like my privacy was a joke being passed around. Like my marriage, my home, had become content on someone else's phone. My fingers moved on their own, shaking as I typed, "Who is this?" The message sent with a tiny whoosh that sounded too loud in the quiet car. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the typing bubble appeared, 3 bouncing dots. My pulse thudded in my ears. I stared at those dots like they were a fuse burning down. A reply was coming, a name, an explanation, Something that would make sense of the last 24 hours. The dots danced, and then they stopped. The bubble vanished. No message. Just silence. It was a different kind of cruelty, that pause. Like someone had leaned in close to whisper and then decided watching me wait was part of the fun. The pickup line lurched forward. I eased the car ahead. Hands tight on the wheel, nails biting into the leather. Another buzz. One more message from the unknown number. Look closer. He's not yours. My vision blurred for a second, like my eyes couldn't decide what to focus on. The words on the screen or the world outside the windshield. He's not yours. Not my husband? Not my life? Not my... What exactly? A sound escaped me that wasn't a word, just breath snapping in my throat. I swallowed hard, but it didn't loosen anything. It felt like my airway had shrunk. I lifted my gaze to the rearview mirror. The mirror caught my face, too pale, eyes too wide, and behind me, a line of cars stretching back toward the street. Parents, strangers, a silver sedan, a blue minivan, a black SUV with tinted windows. I stared at that SUV like it had chosen me, for the first time in my life. In the middle of the safest place I knew, I wondered who might be watching from behind the glass. I wondered if that photo on someone else's table had been taken across from a smile I'd recognize if I saw it. The air freshener swung slightly as I breathed, sweet and artificial. My hands tightened again, and I forced myself to look forward, to keep moving, to stay normal. But my body didn't feel normal anymore. Now I understand the moment someone knows your schedule, they don't just know where you are. They're telling you they can reach you whenever they want. The cafe sat in a strip mall between a nail salon and a pet groomer, the kind of place I'd driven past 100 times without ever noticing. That day, the parking lot felt too open, like a stage. I parked at the far end, away from the windows, and sat for a second with both hands on the steering wheel, listening to my own breathing rasp against the quiet. My phone screen still showed the pin drop location. Ask for Lena. My fingers were cold, even though the sun was out. I checked the rearview mirror again. Black SUV, silver sedan, minivan, just normal cars, normal people. But my brain had turned everything into a threat. I grabbed my purse like it was armor and stepped out. The bell above the cafe door chimed when I walked in, bright and cheerful in a way that made my skin crawl. Warm air hit my face. Espresso, steamed milk, cinnamon. The smell should have been comforting. Instead, it made my stomach roll. I could hear the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of spoons against ceramic, a low murmur of voices. Normal life. People laughing like their names hadn't been written on expensive envelopes by strangers. I walked up to the counter and forced my voice to behave. "Hi," I said, and the barista, early 20s, a nose ring, bored eyes, blinked at me like I was just another order. "I'm meeting someone," I added. My throat tightened around the words, Lena. The barista's expression shifted slightly, like she'd heard that name before in this exact context. She didn't ask questions. She just jerked her chin toward the back. "Booth by the outlet," she said. My legs moved before my mind could catch up. The floor was sticky near the condiment station, and the scent of cinnamon was stronger back there, like someone had tried to make the air feel safe on purpose. I slid into the booth first, back against the wall, facing the room. My heart hammered like it wanted out. I tried to taste the water I'd grabbed from the self-serve station, but it was pointless. Panic coated my tongue. Everything tasted like nothing. A woman approached a moment later and sat across from me without hesitation, like she'd been rehearsing the angle. She was about my age, maybe a little younger, with dark hair tucked behind her ears, and a plain gray sweater that didn't try to impress anyone. Her hands were steady when she set her phone on the table, not a tremor, not even a fidget. Her eyes flicked over me in one quick sweep. Wedding ring, tired eyes, the way my shoulders were pulled tight like I was bracing for impact. She didn't smile. She didn't say hello. She leaned forward slightly and asked, How long have you been married? The question hit me like a slap because it didn't sound curious. It sounded procedural, like she was checking a box. My mouth opened, but for a second nothing came out. I had to force the number like it was hidden behind my ribs. 9 years, I said. Together, 12. She nodded once, like that mattered, like it changed what she was allowed to say next. Then she looked at my face longer, and something hot rose in my chest. Anger, shame, confusion, because her expression wasn't cruel exactly. It was pity. The kind of pity that felt insulting because it implied I was late to my own funeral, like everyone had been invited to the truth except me. I shifted in the booth, my nails digging into my palm under the table. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why are you doing this?" She exhaled through her nose like she'd been holding that breath for days. "My name is Lena," she said finally. Her tone stayed calm, but her eyes didn't soften. "And before you ask, no, I didn't replace your face." The words landed in my stomach, heavy and cold. My lips went dry. "Then who did?" Lena's gaze didn't flicker. "Ryan did," she said. "Or someone who loves him enough to pretend to be you." It felt like the cafe got louder all at once. The hiss of steam, the chatter, the grinder whining. Everything swelled until it pressed against my skull. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to say it was a misunderstanding, to take it back. She didn't. I swallowed hard. "Why?" I whispered, and hated how small my voice sounded. Lena hesitated for the first time, like there was a line she wouldn't cross yet. "I'm not going to say her name," she said. "Not here." My pulse throbbed in my throat. Her? Lena's eyes narrowed slightly, not at me, past me like she was watching a memory. "She's polished," she said. "Perfect hair, PTA smile, the kind of woman who looks like she belongs in every photo." Her mouth tightened. "And she's always near your husband." I felt something in me crack quietly, like a thin sheet of ice giving way. My hands shook under the table, but I kept my face still because I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. The cinnamon smell turned sharp in my nose. My stomach clenched again, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Now I understand some warnings don't come with sirens. They come with a stranger's calm eyes and the kind of pity that tells you your life has been happening without your consent. Lena's booth felt smaller now, as if the air had thickened with espresso and cinnamon and the sound of strangers laughing at other tables. My phone sat between us, screen bright, as if it wanted to witness everything. "Zoom in," Lena said, voice flat. "On his hand." I told myself it was just a trick of printing, a cheap edit meant to scare me. My thumb still shook as I opened the photo again. The glossy portrait filled the screen, Ryan's arm around me, Ben tucked under his shoulder, that other woman's smile wearing my life. I pinched the image and dragged it closer. Pixels softened into grain, then sharpened again. Ryan's hand rested on my waist, fingers spread like possession. His wedding band sat there, familiar gold. I nudged the zoom until the ring filled half the screen. The band wasn't sitting straight. It was slightly rotated. And along the inner edge, a thin line of engraving caught the light. My brain tried to deny it before my eyes could finish seeing. Denial rose fast, like a reflex that kept marriages intact by blurring the corners. I blinked, once, twice, hard enough to sting. The letters stayed. "What does it say?" Lena asked, but she didn't sound curious. She sounded tired, like she'd carried this truth alone for too long. I swallowed. My mouth tasted like burnt coffee and fear. Those aren't our initials," I whispered, and the words felt shameful, like I was admitting I hadn't earned the right to know my own husband's hand. The engraving was tiny, but I could make it out. 2 letters intertwined, not E and R like ours. Something else. A second ring. A second promise. Worn on the same finger in the same place. close enough that only someone intimate would notice it was different. Heat crawled up my neck. I remembered every time Ryan had corrected me for misplacing his keys. Every time he joked, I was scatterbrained, like I couldn't be trusted with details. And here was a detail he had hidden in plain sight, like my role was to look pretty and not look close. Lena leaned forward. "I saw it on him," she said, "at a family event that wasn't yours." My stomach lurched. The cafe suddenly felt too warm. The cinnamon clung to the back of my throat. "What do you mean?" She didn't flinch. "I mean, he introduced another woman as his wife." The word wife hit me like cold water. I heard the clink of a spoon at a nearby table, someone laughing too loudly, life continuing while mine started to tear. "You're sure?" I asked, and hated the way my voice begged, like proof could spare me. Lena unlocked her phone and turned it toward me. "I took this from across the room," she said. "I didn't want to be seen." The photo was grainy, zoomed in, taken through a crowd, but Ryan was unmistakable. His posture, the slope of his shoulders, that confident tilt of his head when he thought everyone loved him. He walked beside a woman with perfect hair and a bright smile that looked practiced for cameras. Carrie. I knew her face from school newsletters and hallway hellos. Ryan held her hand, not a quick friendly touch, fingers laced, close, claiming. They were leaving a school fundraiser, the gym doors behind them, string lights blurred in the background. Ben wasn't there. No small boy trailing behind, no backpack, no sticky fingers reaching for mine. Just Ryan and Carrie, walking like a couple with a shared story. My hands went numb. I tried to speak and only air came out. A buzzing filled my ears, louder than the espresso machine, louder than my own breath. I pressed my thumbnail into the soft skin of my palm until it hurt, just to prove I was still in my body. The booth vinyl stuck to the backs of my thighs. The air felt thick with sugar and burnt beans. Across the room, a man laughed, and it sounded obscene. I kept staring at Ryan's hand in that photo, at the way his fingers fit hers, and my mind tried to rewrite it. Maybe it was a handshake, maybe it was a moment caught wrong, but I knew my husband's touch. I knew the exact way he held my waist for pictures, firm enough to guide me, gentle enough to look loving. Seeing that same grip on her made me feel replaceable. Like a background prop he could swap out without anyone noticing. I whispered, "Why would he do this?" and hated how small I sounded today. Lena watched me without pity now, just a hard steadiness. "He's building a second family story," she said, voice dropping low, "and your portrait was the rehearsal." The bell over Everbright's door gave a tired jingle when I stepped inside. Warm air smelled like ink, paper dust, and a sharp chemical sweetness that reminded me of new textbooks. A cutter thumped somewhere in the back. Under cold fluorescent lights, everything looked slightly gray, like color had been leached out on purpose. A man with silver hair and wire frame glasses looked up from behind the counter. His name tag said Diaz, but the sign on the wall read Mr. Diaz in bold marker like a teacher's desk. He watched me the way shop owners watch people who might break something. "I need to ask about a photo order," I said, and my voice sounded too polite, too small. "What name?" he asked, already turning toward a computer. "Emily Harper," I answered, then added, "My husband Ryan might have—" His fingers paused on the keyboard. He looked at me again, slower this time, as if my face was a puzzle. "Are you the real Emily?" he asked. Heat rushed to my cheeks. Even strangers were asking if I belonged in my own life now. I forced a tight smile that tasted like metal. "Yes," I said. "I'm his wife." Mr. Diaz gave a thin nod, not apologizing, just moving on like humiliation was a normal fee. He clicked through folders, squinting at the screen as if the truth was physically uncomfortable to read. The monitor glow reflected in his glasses, hiding his eyes. "Everbright imaging. Family portrait package," he muttered. "Rush. Private pickup." He scrolled, lips pressed together. "Here." He turned the screen slightly, not enough for me to see everything, but enough to show a list of notes. My stomach tightened as words snapped into focus. Face swap, background cleanup, remove wedding glare, natural blending. The notes looked clinical, like surgery orders. Like erasing me was a routine service. I inhaled, and the air tasted dusty. "Those were requested?" I asked, though I already knew. He nodded. "Your husband was specific," he said. "Wanted it to look believable." He cleared his throat as if the word embarrassed him. He paid extra. Rush fee plus privacy handling. Privacy handling? My voice cracked on the second word. "No email proofs," he explained, tapping the screen. He said, "Protect privacy." So he didn't send previews. He insisted on private pickup. No questions, no contact information beyond a phone number. I thought of Ryan flipping his phone face down, the practiced motion. My hands curled into fists inside my coat pockets so Mr. Diaz wouldn't see them shake. "Can you print whatever you have?" I asked. "Receipts, timestamps, anything." Mr. Diaz hesitated, then slid open a drawer and pulled out a small receipt printer like it was a confession machine. The paper fed through with a squeal. He tore off the strip, then printed a longer page, stapling them together with careful clicks. He handed it to me across the counter. The paper felt warm, freshly printed. Dates, times, services, a pickup line at the bottom with a signature. My eyes went straight there. It wasn't Ryan's handwriting. The letters were rounded, feminine. I traced the name with my thumb, pulse hammering. It read, Carrie. For a second, the shop tilted, and all I could hear was the printer cooling down. The elementary school hallway smelled like disinfectant and crayons, that sharp, clean chemical bite layered over something sweet and childish. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, turning everyone's skin a little pale. Kids' artwork lined the walls, construction paper pumpkins and glittery hearts, like the building was trying to convince you nothing bad could happen here. I walked in with my purse strap cutting into my shoulder and that receipt folded in my coat pocket like a secret weapon. My heartbeat felt loud in my ears, but I kept my face neutral, practiced. The kind of calm women learn when they've been told they're too emotional one too many times. Carrie stood near the main office, clipboard pressed to her chest, surrounded by two other moms like satellites. She wore a cream cardigan that looked expensive but effortless. Hair smooth and perfect like she'd never fought with humidity in her life. When she saw me, her smile widened, bright, polished, the exact kind you'd put on a PTA flyer. "Emily!" she sang out, as if we were friends, as if she hadn't signed her name on the pickup line of my replacement. She stepped closer, her perfume reaching me before she did. Something floral and clean that had no right to be in a hallway full of glue sticks and lunchboxes. "We're just talking about community," she said, gesturing to the moms beside her like she was the mayor of the building. "You know, keeping things supportive." Supportive. The word landed wrong, like a costume. One of the moms glanced at me, then at Carrie, then away, as if she sensed tension but didn't want to earn it. Carrie tilted her head, eyes softening into something that looked like concern. It was a performance I'd seen her do 100 times when a kid scraped a knee or a parent missed a deadline. "Sweetie," she said, and my stomach tightened at the way she made it sound natural. "Have you been okay lately?" She didn't say it quietly. She said it loud enough that the moms beside her heard. Loud enough that the receptionist looked up from her computer for a second. Loud enough that if I reacted, I'd be the problem. My cheeks warmed, not because I was embarrassed of being not okay, but because she'd framed me that way on purpose. Fragile, unstable, someone who needed checking on, a woman who might not be reliable. I forced a small smile. "I'm fine," I said, the words tasting like paper. Carrie's gaze dipped, just for a second, to my left hand, to my wedding ring. Her eyes flicked there in a way so fast most people would miss it, but I didn't. It wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. Like she was measuring timelines. Like she was counting the days between wife and ex-wife and deciding where she fit. My fingers curled slightly, instinctively shielding the ring, and I hated that I did it. Hated that my body reacted like I needed to protect my claim, like marriage was a prize someone could snatch if they smiled hard enough. I drew in a breath, letting the disinfectant sting my nose and clear my head. I kept my tone casual, almost bored. "Funny thing," I said, leaning into the mask of normal. "We got a family portrait sent to our house. No return address. Weird, right?" Carrie didn't blink. Her smile stayed exactly the same, like it had been laminated, but her hand tightened on her clipboard. Her knuckles went a shade lighter, the plastic edge creaking faintly under the pressure. A small tell, a crack in the polish. "Oh," she said lightly, "that is odd." I watched her eyes, waiting for surprise. There was none. Not even a flicker. One of the moms laughed awkwardly, like she wanted to smooth the air. "People do the strangest things," she said, then checked her phone as if she had somewhere else to be. Carrie stepped closer, still smiling, still owning the space. "Ryan's such a dedicated father," she said, and the emphasis hit me like a shove. Father. Not husband, not partner. Just father. Like that was the only role that mattered. Like the wife part was optional, interchangeable, editable. My throat tightened, but I kept my face calm. Inside, something hot and steady started to build. Not panic this time. Clarity. Today I know some women don't flirt with your husband. They audition for your life right in front of you, and they call it community. The house went quiet after Ben fell asleep, the kind of quiet that made every creak feel like it meant something. The TV threw a dull blue glow across the living room while I sat on the couch with my phone, thumb hovering over the bank app like it could bite. When the balance loaded, I didn't look at the big number. I looked at the list. Everbright Imaging, a charge for printing services. Then another, rush fee. My throat tightened as I scrolled, a catering deposit. Not groceries, not pizza, an actual deposit like someone was planning linen napkins and folding chairs. Below that, a venue reservation labeled Family Event. Family Event. The words made my stomach roll because our family events were sticky fingers and homework battles, not deposits and venues. Ryan came in from the hallway barefoot, smelling faintly of toothpaste and his expensive soap. He glanced at the screen in my hands. "You're still doing that?" he asked, half amused. "I'm just checking," I said, keeping my voice light. "What are these charges? Printing, catering, a venue?" He gave a short laugh and dropped onto the armchair like my concern was entertainment. "Emily, you wouldn't understand budgets," he said. "It's boring adult stuff." My face burned. "I manage this house," I said, softer, because Ben was down the hall. Ryan waved a hand, dismissing me without even looking up. "You make everything complicated," he murmured, then stood. "Go to bed." He left me with the TV glow and the feeling that I was asking permission to know my own life. The next morning, I drove to the bank with my hands tight on the wheel. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and stale coffee, and the fluorescent lights made everyone's smiles look thin. A banker named Kelly led me to a small desk and spoke quietly, like she'd learned bad news traveled fast. "We've had attempts to add an authorized user to your account," she said. "I didn't approve that," I whispered. "I know," she replied, eyes flicking to her monitor. "There's also a pending request to change the contact email." My pulse thudded. To whose email? She turned the screen just enough for me to see the masked address, letters that weren't mine. "If that change goes through," Kelly said, "someone could lock you out. We can add extra verification today." I nodded, numb, while she printed forms that felt rough and too real in my hands. Then she hesitated. "There are transfers," she said, "to an account called Household Planning." "That's ours?" I asked, clinging to hope. "It isn't joint," she said gently. "It's in one name." Household Planning, a harmless label for a private exit. In my car, I called my sister Jordan. "I need that attorney," I said. Minutes later, I called Addison. His voice was calm, surgical. "Send me everything," he said. "Receipts, screenshots, alerts." I forwarded the Everbright receipt photo, the bank notices, the venue charge, and hit send. The little whoosh sounded small, but it was the first move that felt like mine. I sat there with my forehead against the steering wheel, breathing in vinyl and cold air. The paperwork rustled in my purse like dry leaves. Today I know receipts don't lie, even when spouses do quietly. The school gym sounded like 1,000 small performances happening at once, laughter bouncing off varnished floors, sneakers squeaking, plastic raffle tickets snapping between fingers. Someone had set up a popcorn machine near the entrance, and the air carried that buttery smell mixed with cheap vanilla perfume and the sharp sting of disinfectant that never fully left a school building. Parents drifted in clusters under string lights taped along the bleachers, phones already raised. Cameras loved these nights. Everyone did. It was community. It was wholesome. It was proof we were all doing fine. Carrie floated through it like she'd invented the idea of children. Her clipboard was tucked under her arm like a scepter. She laughed too brightly, touched shoulders too familiarly, and kept turning her body toward any lens that pointed her way. Every time she said, "We're so grateful," her smile looked practiced, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. I walked in with my spine straight and my stomach hollow. The receipt sat in my purse, folded crisp, the paper edge pressing against my wallet like a reminder not to soften. Addison's business card was in my other pocket, and I kept my fingers on it the way you keep a hand on a railing when you're walking somewhere high. Ryan spotted me from across the gym. His face shifted, only for a second, but I saw it. A tightening around the mouth, a warning behind the eyes. He crossed the floor fast, weaving through parents like he owned the path. "Emily," he said low, smiling for anyone watching. His hand landed on my elbow. Not gentle, not painful, just firm enough to guide me. "Not here." The words were a whisper, but the message was loud. Not here, not in front of them, not where his image lived. He tried to steer me toward the hallway, away from the raffle table, away from the crowd and the cameras, like my dignity was something he managed, like a volume knob he could turn down when it got inconvenient. I planted my feet. The gym floor felt tacky under my shoes. "I'm here for Ben's school," I said, calm. My voice didn't shake, and I hated that it surprised him. Ryan's smile held too long again. "You're making a scene," he murmured through his teeth. "We'll talk at home." That's when Addison walked up beside me, not hurried, not dramatic. He looked like he belonged in any room that required consequences, neatly dressed, calm eyes, a folder tucked under his arm like it weighed nothing. "Ryan Harper?" Addison asked politely. Ryan's posture straightened with automatic charm. "Yeah, and you are—" Addison extended a hand and Ryan shook it because people were watching. "Addison Cole," he said. "I represent Emily." The words, "I represent," changed the air. Even before anyone understood why, the energy shifted. Nearby parents slowed. A couple of heads turned. Carrie, across the room, paused mid-laugh like someone had muted her. Addison angled his body slightly so the conversation looked private. But he kept his voice just loud enough to be heard by anyone standing close, public enough to keep them polite. "Could I have a quick word with you?" Addison said. "And with Carrie as well?" Carrie appeared almost instantly, like she'd been waiting for her cue. "Is everything okay?" she asked, syrupy sweet, eyes flicking to Ryan first. Addison opened his folder and pulled out a paper. The receipt. White, ordinary, devastating. He held it up between them like a mirror. "Carrie," he said evenly, "is this your signature?" Her smile didn't drop, but it stiffened. What is that?" Addison didn't blink. "A pickup receipt from Everbright Imaging," he said. Then, without raising his voice, he asked, "Why did you pick up a family portrait where Emily's face was replaced?" The gym didn't go silent completely, but it got quiet in the way a room does when a secret breaks the surface. Someone stopped laughing mid-sentence. A raffle ticket booth volunteer stared too openly. Carrie's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Oh my God," she said, forcing a laugh that sounded thin. Wow, it was a joke. People do silly things for the fundraiser sometimes." "A joke," Addison repeated, still calm. "A face swap, a rush fee, privacy handling, and your signature on pickup." Carrie's hand tightened around her clipboard, knuckles whitening. Her eyes darted, searching for an exit. Ryan stepped in fast, voice sharpened with that familiar contempt meant for me. "This is ridiculous," he said, turning to the small audience that had gathered. "Emily's been paranoid lately. She's spiraling over nothing." Paranoid. Spiraling. The words were old weapons, polished from use. Addison didn't flinch. He turned slightly toward Ryan, lowering his tone just enough to sound professional, not theatrical. "Ryan," he said, "I'm advising you carefully. There are fraud protections we can invoke, and we have pending court filings prepared. If you continue to misrepresent financial activity and identity-related conduct, you will be dealing with it in a formal setting." Ryan's smile finally cracked. His eyes changed. Not anger exactly, not fear exactly, but something colder, calculating. Like a man realizing his costume had seams, and everyone was close enough to see them. Today I know power doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like paperwork held steady in a crowded room. The car door shut with a heavy thud that sounded final, like a judge's gavel. Ben climbed into the back seat, backpack sliding off one shoulder, still sticky from fundraiser cotton candy. The interior smelled like crushed snack wrappers and the faint, sour sweet of juice boxes that had leaked months ago and never fully left the upholstery. Ryan got behind the wheel without saying a word. His jaw worked like he was chewing anger. When he started the engine, the radio came on for half a second, an upbeat pop song, before he snapped it off. Silence filled the cabin, thick and vibrating. Streetlights flashed across his hands as we pulled out of the parking lot. Light, dark, light, dark, like a warning signal. His knuckles were white around the steering wheel, tendons standing out, the leather creaking under the pressure. I kept my eyes forward. My pulse was loud, but my face stayed still. I had learned that if I cried, he won. If I raised my voice, he'd call me unstable. So I swallowed everything and made myself calm. Ryan exhaled sharply through his nose. "You had to do that," he said finally. "Not a question, a charge." I didn't answer. I opened my phone in my lap, screen dimmed low, and tapped the audio recorder. In my state, it was legal to record a conversation I was part of, and Addison had already told me, let him talk. Let him hang himself with his own words. Ryan glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Ben watching us. His mouth softened instantly into that public-friendly dad expression, like he was switching masks. "Buddy," he said, voice sugary, "your mom's upset again." Again. Like my pain was a rerun, like it was routine entertainment in the back seat. Ben's shoulders shrank. He looked down at his hands, twisting a fundraiser bracelet around his wrist. The tiny plastic beads clicked softly, the only sound besides the turn signal. "She embarrassed me," Ryan continued, still speaking to Ben like I wasn't there. "Some people can't handle grown-up conversations." My cheeks burned, but I kept breathing slow, in through my nose, out through my mouth. I watched the dark road ahead, watched the streetlights spill across the dashboard, and let the silence make him itch. Ryan couldn't stand silence. He needed it filled with his version of reality. "You know why this is happening?" he said, voice sharpening. "Because you always have to make everything dramatic. You can't just be normal." I turned my head slightly, not confrontational, just present. "Normal," I repeated quietly. He scoffed. "Carrie understands me," he said, and there it was, too easy, too quick, like he'd been waiting to say it. "She gets what it takes to run things. She's not exhausting." My stomach tightened, but my face stayed still. The recorder icon pulsed on my phone like a heartbeat. Ryan's grip tightened again. The wheels squeaked. "You're boring, Emily," he said, as if he was diagnosing me. "You're predictable. You want the same little routine forever. It's like living with beige." Beige. like loyalty was a flaw, like stability was something shameful. Ben made a small sound in the back seat, a breathy hiccup of confusion. I met his eyes in the rearview mirror for a second and gave him a tiny nod that said, "I'm here. You're safe." Even though my own chest felt hollow, Ryan's voice lowered, turning colder. "And don't get ideas," he said, eyes on the road, tone casual like he was talking about traffic. "You're not taking my son away from me." My skin went tight. "No one said," I started. He cut me off with a sharp laugh. "Oh, please, I know you. You'll run to your sister, cry to some lawyer, try to paint me as the bad guy." He glanced at me, and his eyes weren't charming anymore. They were flat. "But no one will choose you over me." Ice slid into my chest, slow and brutal. The words weren't just a threat. They were a promise. A man telling me he'd rather destroy me than lose control. I stared out the window at the passing houses, warm porch lights, curtains drawn, families inside eating dinner, like I was watching another world I didn't belong to anymore. Today I know the scariest mask isn't the charming one. It's the one that slips in the dark when he thinks you can't prove what you heard. The police station lobby smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant, the kind that tried to erase human mess but never really did. The fluorescent lights were unforgiving, turning everyone's skin a little gray. A TV bolted in the corner played muted news, captions crawling along the bottom like a warning you couldn't turn off. I sat in a plastic chair that stuck slightly to the backs of my thighs, my purse in my lap, fingers locked around it like it contained my spine. Jordan sat close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. Every few seconds she pressed her hand gently onto mine, grounding me like she could physically keep me from floating away. Addison stood at the counter with a folder, speaking quietly to an officer. He looked calm in the way people look when they're used to rooms with consequences. I felt like my whole life was shaking under my skin, but my face stayed still. I didn't know how to be anything else anymore. A door opened and a man stepped into the lobby, holding a paper cup of coffee. Detective Monroe. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Lines around his eyes, the kind of patience that came from hearing the same lies on repeat. He nodded once at Addison, then looked at me. "Emily?" he asked. I stood, legs stiff, and followed him into a small interview room. The air in there was colder, and the table had scratches carved into it like people had tried to leave pieces of themselves behind. Monroe sat across from me, Jordan at my side, Addison near the door. The detective opened a notebook, clicked a pen, and said, "Start from the beginning, the envelope." So I told him. The thick paper. No return address, the altered portrait with my face replaced. I explained the logo, Ever-Bright Imaging, and how Ryan had acted too casual, too ready. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, like I was narrating someone else's nightmare. Monroe didn't interrupt. He listened with his head slightly tilted, eyes steady, like he was building a timeline in real time. Then I slid the print shop receipt across the table. The paper looked flimsy in that sterile room, but it made Monroe's expression tighten. "Face swap," he read aloud, voice flat. "Rush, private pickup." His pen tapped once. Signature, Carrie. I told him about the bank alerts, the authorized user attempts, the pending email change, the transfers into an account called Household Planning that wasn't joint. I told him about the missing passport, the way Ryan's voice had sounded too casual when he asked why I'd need it, like he'd already decided what freedom I was allowed to have. Monroe finally leaned back, exhaling slowly. "And you didn't confront him immediately," he said. It wasn't harsh, but it landed heavy. My cheeks warmed anyway. "I did," I started, then stopped because it wasn't that simple. Jordan's hand pressed into my shoulder, firm, supportive. Monroe's eyes stayed on mine. "Help me understand," he said. "Why stay calm? Why not just leave?" The words were framed like curiosity, but they carried something else, an old, familiar weight. The unspoken implication that if I didn't run fast enough, it couldn't be that bad, that my control was consent. I swallowed, throat tight. Because when I react, I said carefully, he uses it. He calls me unstable. He tells our son I'm upset again. He makes my emotions the problem. If I leave without proof, he gets to rewrite the story. Monroe nodded once, and for the first time I felt like he actually heard the part underneath my words. He wrote something down, then said, "This could involve identity misuse, financial abuse, coercive control." His pen paused. "And you said your son was told to keep secrets." My stomach turned. "Ben told me Ryan told him not to mention Carrie," I said, voice low. He's been managing him." Monroe's jaw tightened. "Child manipulation," he murmured, mostly to himself. Then he looked at Addison. "You're going to want records preserved." Addison nodded immediately. "I want preservation letters sent today," he said, "to Everbright Imaging, to the school fundraiser organizers. Any communications, orders, pickups, emails, security footage, everything." Monroe scribbled again, then slid his chair back. "We can do that," he said, "and we'll open a report." He looked at me like he was weighing the next question carefully. "But we need to understand how deep this goes." Jordan's hand stayed on my shoulder, steady as a stake in the ground. I stared at the scratched tabletop and realized I'd been holding my breath. Today I know the most dangerous part of being controlled is how normal it starts to feel, until someone finally names it out loud. The address came from paperwork, not intuition. Addison didn't hunt it down like in movies. He requested records, waited for responses, followed the clean legal steps that left footprints no one could argue with later. Detective Monroe did the same, careful and methodical, like he'd learned the hard way that charming men lived in the gaps between sloppy procedures. When Addison read the line out loud, "An apartment complex 10 minutes from our house," I felt my stomach drop as if my body recognized the place before my mind could. We drove there in separate cars. The sky was a flat winter gray, the kind that made everything look drained. My hands stayed locked around my phone in my lap, but I wasn't calling anyone. I didn't want comfort. I wanted clarity. The complex was newer, all beige siding and trimmed shrubs, with a leasing office that tried too hard. Cheerful banners, a little fountain bubbling in the courtyard like it was trying to sound soothing. Monroe showed credentials. Addison spoke in firm, polite sentences. Papers changed hands. Keys appeared with a small metal clink that sounded too ordinary for what it opened. Ryan's company reimbursement program, that was how it was listed. Like a perk, like convenience, like none of it had anything to do with me. I stood on the sidewalk outside the building and stared up at the second-floor unit number, my breath fogging in the cold. A place my husband built while I packed lunches and paid bills and folded his socks and believed the life we had was exclusive, like marriage was a closed door. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was a slow burn in my chest. I felt stupid in a way that made me want to scrub my own skin. Addison unlocked the door. The deadbolt slid back with a soft, practiced click, like it had been used often. When we stepped inside, warm air hit my face, carrying the scent of linen spray and brand new furniture. It smelled staged, curated, fake clean, like someone had sprayed fresh start into the air until it became a lie you could breathe. The living room was neat, almost sterile. A neutral couch with stiff cushions, a throw blanket folded with perfect corners. No clutter, no real life. But the wall told the truth. Framed photos lined the space above a small console table. Ryan and Carrie at events, smiling too close, shoulders touching, the same polished look she wore at school. One photo looked like it had been taken at a dinner gala, another at a fundraiser backdrop with a logo behind them. They stood like a couple who didn't need to explain themselves. My throat tightened when I saw the last frame. Ben's school photo. Not an original, clearly a copy, printed and placed like a prop in their story. My son's face living on their wall like he'd already been moved into the script. I heard my own breath, thin and sharp. Monroe's pen scratched across his notepad. Addison moved through the apartment quietly, taking photos, documenting drawers, snapping pictures of labels and furniture tags, and anything that proved intent. "This supports misuse of marital assets," Addison said, voice controlled. Monroe nodded, eyes scanning. "And potentially fraud if company reimbursement was used improperly," he added. I stood in the middle of that curated living room, staring at my family rearranged into someone else's display. Today I know the worst betrayals aren't messy, they're organized. The courthouse hallway felt refrigerated, even with heat blasting through vents. Every step clicked on tile, and the air smelled like copier toner and old paper. Jordan walked beside me, her hand hovering near my elbow like she could catch me if I tipped. Addison carried a slim folder, calm as a surgeon. Across the corridor, Ryan stood with his attorney, smiling like this was a networking event. She wore a sharp blazer and a sharper expression, and she looked at me as if I was a stain. When we passed, she spoke loudly enough for strangers to hear. Unpredictable, emotional, prone to scenes. Ryan didn't correct her. He let the words land on my skin like dirt. Inside the courtroom, the fluorescent lights flattened everyone into the same tired shade. The judge sat high, unreadable, while Ryan's lawyer painted me as jealous and irrational. She described my episodes as if betrayal was my personality disorder. My face burned, but I kept my hands folded, refusing to give her a single tremor. Addison stood and didn't defend my feelings. He defended facts. He placed the ever-bright records on the table: face swap, background cleanup, remove wedding glare, natural blending. He slid the receipt forward, tapping the signature line. "Carrie Thompson picked it up," he said, voice level. Ryan's smile tightened, and his lawyer tried to object, but the judge lifted a hand. Addison continued, laying out bank alerts, attempted authorized users, and a pending email change. He showed transfers into an account labeled Household Planning, not joint, not disclosed. The numbers looked sterile, but they felt like fingerprints on my throat. Then came the lease, a second apartment under Ryan's company reimbursement program. I remembered packing Ben's lunches while Ryan built another living room with staged pillows and linen spray. Addison explained marital asset misuse, and Monroe's report noted potential fraud. Ryan's eyes finally flicked toward me, cold and warning. Addison's last exhibit was Ben's disclosure. Ryan told him not to tell Mom about Carrie. My stomach clenched. My son's silence had been engineered. The judge asked one question about custody routines, then spoke with clipped certainty. Temporary financial restraints, temporary custody safeguards. No more improvisation. In the hallway afterward, Ryan's attorney's tone changed, suddenly careful. Addison stepped aside to take calls, and each one peeled away another layer of Ryan's image. The school board opened an inquiry into Carrie's conduct and her use of school events for personal schemes. Parents nearby whispered, and her PTA halo cracked in real time. Monroe called to confirm Ryan's employer had started investigating the reimbursement tied to that apartment. HR didn't care about charm, they cared about receipts. Ryan stood a few feet away, face fixed, as if he could will the paperwork to disappear. I felt something shift in my chest. Not joy, not revenge, just relief that the story was no longer his to control. Jordan squeezed my shoulder as we walked toward the exit, the metal detector beeping behind us for someone else. Ryan's footsteps followed for a moment, then stopped, like he realized chasing me would look wrong under these cameras. Outside, wind cut through my coat, and the sky hung low over the parking lot. Ryan approached just close enough to hiss, "You're destroying our family," as if he hadn't been the one sending my face away in an envelope. I didn't answer. I let Addison speak, because my silence was finally protected by orders, not hope. "All communication goes through counsel," Addison said, and the way Ryan's nostrils flared told me he hated having to comply. He turned to Carrie on his phone, muttering, and she didn't sound confident anymore. Jordan guided me to my car, palms warm through my sleeve, while I stared at the courthouse doors and listened to them shut with a heavy click. My phone vibrated with a notification from the bank confirming the freeze, and my knees almost buckled quietly with the sudden release. Ryan watched that tiny screen like it was a verdict, then looked away, jaw working, as if swallowing glass alone. Today I understand that control depends on private rooms. Under fluorescent lights and sworn statements, his mask couldn't breathe. The rental smelled like fresh paint and clean laundry, the kind of clean that didn't belong to anyone yet. The walls were too white, the carpet too new, and every sound felt louder. Ben's socks scuffing, a cabinet door settling, the soft rush of the heater kicking on. My hands trembled as I tore strips of tape and pressed his drawings onto the wall above the small kitchen table. A crooked house, a stick-figure family, a son with angry eyebrows. I kept smoothing the corners like I could flatten the last few weeks out of him. Ben hovered behind me with his backpack still on, watching my face the way he'd learned to, checking if the room was safe before he let himself breathe. "Is this our house now?" he asked, voice small. "For now," I said, too gently. "Just for now." My phone buzzed while I worked. A mutual friend's name lit up the screen, then another. Texts that began with hearts and ended with advice. "Have you tried counseling? Sometimes marriages go through misunderstandings. Ryan's a good guy, Em. Don't throw it away over drama." Each message landed like a micro-cut because none of them said the words I needed them to say. He replaced you. He lied. He tried to erase you. They treated betrayal like bad communication, like I'd misplaced the remote and blamed him. Jordan arrived with grocery bags and that practical look she got when she refused to let emotion derail the next step. She filled my empty fridge with yogurt, apples, chicken nuggets, Ben's comfort foods, then wrote a routine on a sticky note and slapped it on the cabinet. "Wake up." Breakfast, school, homework, bath, bed, simple, solid, a spine. "We're not floating," she said, meeting my eyes. "We're building ground." Addison emailed updates in clean paragraphs, filings submitted, orders enforced, timelines outlined, language that didn't care about Ryan's charm. Detective Monroe followed up too, brief and factual, asking about the missing passport, the attempted account changes, any new contact from unknown numbers. Every call made my stomach twist, but it also made me feel less alone in the fight. Ben started therapy the next week. The office smelled like lavender and crayons, a softer version of the school hallway, with a small basket of stress balls on the table. He sat on a child-sized chair with his knees bouncing, then finally whispered the things he'd been holding like stones. He told the therapist how Dad said, "Don't tell Mom about Carrie," like it was a game. How Dad's voice got tight when Ben asked questions. How he'd tried to be good so no one would be mad. I felt it in my bones. Secrets make kids older, too fast. That night, after Ben fell asleep under a blanket that still smelled like our old detergent, I opened my laptop and saw 3 new emails from Ryan. The subject lines were polished. "We need to talk. This looks bad. I'm sorry you feel this way." Inside, he never named what he'd done. "No, I replaced your face." "No, I lied." Just paragraphs about optics, how it looked, how people were misunderstanding, how I was overreacting and damaging Ben by dragging this out. Even in apology, he tried to manage me. Today I know quiet moves save lives. Now I understand my son didn't need a perfect home. He needed a truthful one. The last meeting didn't feel dramatic. It felt like paperwork, like air conditioning, like a pen scratching across a page, while my heart stayed steady for once. Addison's office smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner, and the fluorescent lights were too bright, but I didn't shrink under them the way I used to. I sat across from Ryan with a folder between us like a boundary made solid. Ryan still wore his reasonable face, the one he used on teachers and managers and anyone he wanted to impress. But the charm didn't land the same when it had to compete with documents. He tried anyway. Soft voice, concerned brow, little sighs like he was the victim of my overreaction. Addison didn't react. He just slid papers forward and explained them in calm, surgical sentences. Financial separation, protected accounts, custody schedules written down so no one could improvise, communication boundaries, everything through counsel, no just dropping by, no surprise calls meant to rattle me. The findings were documented, filed, and anchored in places Ryan couldn't sweet-talk. The court record, the bank's fraud notes, the employer's reimbursement investigation, the school board's inquiry. Every system he once trusted to believe him now had his name next to a problem that required receipts. When Ryan tried to argue, "This is excessive," Addison simply pointed to the timeline, the altered portrait, the signature, the account attempts, the second apartment, Ben's disclosure, the way facts stacked on facts until Ryan's story had nowhere left to breathe. I watched Ryan's jaw flex, watched him swallow anger like it was medicine. He signed where he had to sign. Not because he suddenly understood, but because the paper made understanding optional. On the drive home, I caught myself remembering small moments I'd trained my body to accept. Ryan correcting my tone in front of Ben. Ryan laughing when I asked a simple question. Ryan making me feel like my instincts were defects. I remembered standing in my own kitchen with a folded photo, lying junk mail because I'd learned truth was dangerous around him. For the first time, those memories didn't crush me. They looked like old prints left too long in the sun, faded, curling at the edges. I could see that version of me clearly now, the woman who apologized for taking up space, the woman who checked her hair when someone erased her face, and I could feel her loosening from my skin, like she was finally allowed to leave. Carrie tried to keep her smile. But the community had changed its appetite. It's one thing to gossip, it's another to read paperwork. When the school board inquiry moved forward and parents saw the dates and the receipts and the way she used school events like props, her perfect mom image didn't shatter with a bang. It dissolved. People stopped clapping when she walked into a room. Conversations went quiet around her, not because they were impressed, but because they were calculating distance. Ryan hated that more than losing money. He hated losing an audience. Ben didn't care about any of that. He cared about whether I was okay when the door clicked shut at night. He cared about whether I smiled for real. Therapy gave him words for what he'd carried, and routines gave him a place to set it down. One night, he laughed so hard at a stupid joke on TV that he snorted. And then he paused, like he expected punishment for being happy. I touched his hair and said, "It's okay." He laughed again, bigger, freer, without checking my face first to see if it was safe. That was my victory. Quiet, private, real. The legal process ended cleanly. Not painless, not magical, just clear. Boundaries where Ryan used to place fog. Numbers separated where he used to hide transfers. A record that followed him into every room where he tried to charm his way out of accountability. Today, I know replacement is a fantasy men build when they fear consequences. Now I understand that moment I zoomed in on his hand. I didn't just find a ring, I found the thread that unraveled the entire costume. And in the end, the only portrait that mattered wasn't the one they edited. It was the life I rebuilt, one where my face never needed permission to exist.